A boy keeps drawing pictures of a strange man in his school. When the teacher recognizes the face, she breaks down in tears. Sarah Anderson stood at her classroom window, watching the autumn leaves scatter across Riverside Elementary's playground. The morning sun cast long shadows across the freshly painted hopscotch squares, and a crisp October breeze rustled through the maple trees that lined the fence. After 16 years of teaching third grade in this same classroom, she had developed an almost maternal sixth sense about her students, which made her current concern all the more pressing. Her eyes fixed on a small figure sitting alone at one of the wooden picnic tables. Michael Collins, her newest student, hunched over his sketchbook with the same intense concentration he'd shown every recess for the past 3 weeks. His dark brown hair fell forward over his eyes as his pencil moved across the paper with surprising precision for an 8-year-old. "Still at it, huh?" Karen Mitchell, the 4th grade teacher from next door, appeared beside Sarah, coffee mug in hand. "Every day," Sarah replied, absently twisting the silver pendant she always wore. "I've never seen a child so dedicated to drawing, or so consistent with his subject matter." "What do you mean?" Sarah crossed her arms, a habit she'd developed when something troubled her. "It's always the same figure. A man in a fedora standing by the fence. The details never change, the way he stands, the coat, the hat. It's almost like he's drawing from life?" Karen suggested, raising an eyebrow. "That's just it." Sarah turned from the window, walking to her desk where she'd kept a folder of Michael's drawings. Each one had been left behind after class, some crumpled, others carefully torn from his notebook. She spread them out on her desk. Karen set down her coffee and picked up one of the sketches. For a child's drawing, the detail was remarkable. The figure was tall and lean, wearing a dark coat that reached his knees and a fedora that cast a shadow over his face. His hands were always in his pockets, and he stood in the same pose, slightly turned to the side, as if watching something out of frame. "Have you talked to his mother about it?" Karen asked, comparing 2 of the drawings. "Parent-teacher conferences aren't until next month." "But," Sarah hesitated. "I did call her last week. She said Michael's always been artistic, especially since the divorce. She thinks it's just his way of processing things." The recess bell rang, and through the window, they could see Michael carefully closing his sketchbook. Unlike the other children who ran back to the building in noisy clusters, he walked alone, his eyes downcast. "Good morning, Michael," Sarah said warmly as he entered the classroom. He gave her a slight smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes, and slipped into his seat in the second row. As Sarah began her lesson on multiplication tables, she noticed Michael's hand moving under his desk. She knew he was drawing again, but chose not to call attention to it. Instead, she watched as his eyes occasionally drifted to the window, then back to whatever he was sketching. During lunch period, after the children had filed out to the cafeteria, Sarah found herself drawn to Michael's desk. A corner of paper stuck out from under his mathematics workbook. She hesitated, then gently pulled it free. This drawing was different. The man was in his usual pose, but Michael had added more detail to the background. The playground fence was clearly depicted, and behind it, partially hidden by shrubs, was what appeared to be a gardening cart or wheelbarrow. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She walked to the window and looked out at the playground. The maintenance staff had recently begun their fall landscaping work. A wheelbarrow stood abandoned by the fence, half filled with dead leaves. That afternoon, as the children packed up their bags, Sarah noticed Michael lingering at his desk. "Michael," she called softly, "is everything all right?" He looked up, his blue eyes serious. "Ms. Anderson? Do you ever see him?" "See who, Michael?" He glanced at the window, then back at her. "The man who watches us play. He's always there, but nobody else looks at him." Without waiting for her response, he shouldered his backpack and hurried out the door. Sarah stood at her desk long after the last bus had departed. She gathered Michael's drawings and added the new one to her folder. Something about the precision of the details, the consistency of the figure, nagged at her consciousness. As she prepared to leave, movement caught her eye through the window. A tall figure was walking along the fence line, pushing a wheelbarrow. He wore maintenance coveralls and a wide-brimmed hat against the late afternoon sun. She watched until he disappeared around the corner of the building, then opened her laptop. Perhaps it was time to look into the maintenance staff schedules and run some background checks. As she began typing, a long-forgotten memory stirred, something about a man in a hat from her first year of teaching, something she'd tried very hard to forget. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Elementary's teacher's lounge hummed quietly as Sarah stared at her laptop screen. It was nearly 6 in the evening, long after most staff had left, but sleep had been elusive lately, and she found herself staying later each day, searching. On her screen was a decade-old news article from the Boston Globe. 5th child missing in countywide investigation. The photo showed grieving parents, police tape, and a school building that could have been any one of dozens in Massachusetts. Sarah remembered that time all too well, her first year of teaching, when fear had gripped every school in the county. "You're here late," Sarah startled, closing her laptop reflexively. Jenny Martinez, the school counselor, stood in the doorway with a concerned expression. "Just doing some research," Sarah said, rubbing her eyes. "Have you had a chance to observe Michael Collins in class?" Jenny pulled up a chair, her bronze bangles jingling softly. "I have. Quiet boy, very focused. His art teacher says he's remarkably talented for his age." She paused. "You're worried about the drawings." Sarah reopened her laptop, turning it to show Jenny the article. "Do you remember this? 10 years ago, 5 children disappeared from different schools across the county. 8 months, 5 kids, no bodies ever found. I wasn't in the area then," Jenny said, scanning the article. "But I've heard about it. They never caught anyone?" "No." Sarah pulled out her folder of Michael's drawings. But there was a witness description that kept coming up. A tall man in a dark coat and fedora, seen near each school before the disappearances. She spread out Michael's sketches. "Look familiar?" Jenny studied the drawings, her forehead creasing. "Sarah, you can't seriously think—" "I know how it sounds," Sarah interrupted. "But look at this one." She pointed to the most recent drawing, the one with the wheelbarrow. "Michael drew this yesterday morning. The wheelbarrow appeared in the afternoon. He couldn't have seen it before drawing it." "Children have active imaginations," Jenny said gently, "and they notice things adults miss. Maybe he saw the maintenance staff preparing for yard work." Sarah shook her head. "It's more than that. Yesterday he asked me if I could see the man who watches them play. He said, 'Nobody else looks at him.' Those were his exact words." Jenny was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Have you seen anyone suspicious?" "I've seen our new groundskeeper wearing a hat while working, but it's not unusual for maintenance staff to wear hats in the sun." Sarah pulled up another file on her laptop. "I've been looking into the school's maintenance records from 10 years ago. 3 of the 5 schools where children disappeared had recently hired new maintenance staff before the incidents. And Riverside? Our records from that period are incomplete. There was a fire in the administrative building in 2015, and a lot of personnel files were lost." Sarah closed her laptop again. "But I remember something from my first year. There was a maintenance worker who used to wave to my class during recess. He disappeared around the same time as the last child. I never made the connection until now." Jenny leaned back, her professional demeanor softening. "Sarah, I know that first year was traumatic for everyone in the area, but we have to be careful not to see patterns where there might not be any." "I know." Sarah gathered Michael's drawings back into their folder. "But I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something important. These drawings, they're too specific, too consistent." A sudden bang from the hallway made both women jump. Through the lounge window, they saw the evening janitor with his cart, apologetically waving after knocking over a trash can. "Listen," Jenny said, standing up. "Let me spend some time with Michael tomorrow. I'll observe him during recess, maybe have a chat with him. And I think you should talk to David." "Officer Chan? You think this warrants police involvement?" "David's been our resource officer for 5 years. If anyone knows the comings and goings around this school, it's him. At the very least, he can look into the new maintenance staff's background checks." Sarah nodded, gathering her things. As they walked to the parking lot together, the setting sun cast long shadows across the playground. She couldn't help but notice how the evening light transformed familiar shapes into looming figures, how easily a child's imagination could turn ordinary shadows into watching eyes. But as she got into her car, Sarah couldn't shake one persistent thought. Sometimes, what appears to be imagination is actually observation. And sometimes, the monsters that children see are hiding in plain sight. The next morning arrived with a heavy blanket of fog that clung to Riverside Elementary's grounds. Sarah sat in her parked car, earlier than usual, watching the maintenance staff prepare for the day. A figure in dark coveralls pushed a cart along the fence line, disappearing and reappearing through the mist like a ghost. Inside her classroom, Sarah found a new drawing on her desk. Her heart skipped a beat. She always locked her door at night. She picked up the paper with trembling hands. The man in the fedora was there as always, but this time he held something in his hand. A ring of keys. A knock at her door made her jump. "Morning," Officer David Chun said, poking his head in. At 45, with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines around his eyes, he had a way of making everyone feel at ease. "Jenny mentioned you wanted to talk?" Sarah showed him the drawing. "This wasn't here when I left last night." David examined the paper carefully. "You're sure?" "Positive. I always clear my desk before leaving." He pulled out his phone and took a photo. "The janitor has a master key. Let me check who was on duty last night." He paused, studying the drawing more closely. "Jenny mentioned your concerns about the similarities to the old cases." Sarah pulled out her folder of Michael's drawings. As she spread them across her desk, early morning light filtered through the fog outside, casting a gray pallor over the papers. "Look at the consistency," she said. "The stance, the coat, the hat. And now this." She pointed to the keys in the latest drawing. David frowned. "I'll look into our maintenance staff's access privileges." "When does Michael usually draw these?" "During recess. He sits at the picnic table near the old oak tree." "Mind if I observe today?" The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah found herself watching the clock, her lesson on fractions feeling mechanical and distant. Michael sat quietly in his usual spot, his pencil moving beneath his desk even as he appeared to pay attention. When the recess bell rang, David was already positioned near the playground equipment, trying to look casual as he scanned the area. Sarah stood at her usual spot by the window, heart pounding as she watched Michael take his place at the picnic table. Through the playground's chain-link fence, she could see someone working in the grounds beyond, the same figure she'd noticed in the fog that morning. As she watched, he stopped his work and stood still, facing the playground. Sarah's hand went to her throat. The man's stance was identical to the one in Michael's drawings. She hurried outside, the cool October air biting at her cheeks. As she approached Michael's table, she saw his latest drawing taking shape. The man by the fence, but this time he wasn't alone. In the drawing, he was talking to another figure, one wearing what looked like a police uniform. Sarah's head snapped up. Through the fence, she could see the maintenance worker engaged in conversation with Officer Chun. "Michael," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "The man you draw, is that him?" The maintenance worker. Michael didn't look up from his drawing. "He has different faces," he said, continuing to sketch. "Sometimes he's the grass man. Sometimes he's the night man. But he's always watching." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "The night man?" Michael nodded, adding detail to the police officer's badge in his drawing. "He comes when everyone's gone. I saw him from Mom's car when she picked me up late yesterday. He has keys that open all the doors." Sarah looked back toward the fence, but both David and the maintenance worker had disappeared. In the distance, she could hear the rumble of a lawn mower starting up. Later that afternoon, David appeared at her classroom door again. The children were at music class, giving them privacy to talk. "His name is Richard Hayes," David said, closing the door behind him. "Started working here 2 months ago. Background check was clean, but..." He hesitated. "There's something odd. I can't find any employment history before 2015. It's like he didn't exist. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. The same year our personnel records were lost in the fire, David nodded grimly. I'm running his prints through the system. And Sarah? He pulled out his phone, showing her a photo. This was just sent over from Burlington Elementary. One of their students drew this last week. Sarah's hands shook as she looked at the photo. The drawing showed a man in a fedora, standing by a fence. The style was different, but the details, the stance, the coat, the hat were exactly the same as Michael's drawings. Burlington's about 20 miles from here, David said quietly. They just hired a new part-time groundskeeper. Want to guess his name? Outside, the fog had lifted, but Sarah felt a new darkness descending. As she watched her students return from music class, Michael among them, she realized that the shadows of the past weren't just memories anymore. They were taking shape in the present, drawn by the innocent hands of children who saw what the adults had missed for so long. Detective Lisa Reeves sat in her cramped office at the Burlington Police Department, surrounded by stacks of files and photographs. The wall behind her desk had become a maze of red strings connecting photos, employment records, and children's drawings from various schools. At the center was a sketch, the one from Burlington Elementary that had started her newest investigation. Her cell phone buzzed. Reeves, Detective, Officer Chen's voice crackled through. We need to talk about Richard Hayes. 30 minutes later, Sarah Anderson sat across from Detective Reeves, watching as the detective added Michael's drawings to her wall of evidence. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office, making the red strings look like trails of blood. 5 schools in 3 months, Reeves said, stepping back from the wall. All hiring the same man under slightly different names. Richard Hayes, Richard Hayworth, Richard Henderson. Always keeping the first name, always working part-time maintenance or groundskeeping, Sarah studied the pattern of strings. And the drawings? 3 different schools, 3 different children. Reeves pointed to each sketch. Burlington, Riverside, and now Oak Ridge Elementary. All showing the same figure, same pose, same hat. None of the children know each other. Officer Chun leaned against the doorframe. The prints came back clean. Too clean. What do you mean? Sarah asked. No records before 2015. Not even a driver's license. He handed Reeves a folder. But I found something interesting in the old case files. One of the maintenance workers interviewed during the original investigation, a Richard Harrison. He worked at 2 of the schools where children disappeared. Left town right after the last disappearance. Reeves pinned a new photo to the wall, a grainy security camera image from 2015. This was taken at Maple Grove Elementary, 3 days before the last child vanished. Look at his stance. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The man in the photo stood exactly as Michael had drawn him, slightly turned, hands in pockets, fedora casting a shadow over his face. He's been hiding in plain sight, Reeves said, connecting more strings. Taking maintenance jobs at schools, probably using the time to learn routines, security patterns. The hat and coat aren't just a signature, they're camouflage. Maintenance workers are invisible to most people, but not to children, Sarah added quietly. They notice everything. The detective nodded. Exactly. And now he's back using the same method. Different names, different schools, but the same pattern. Why now? Chen asked. Why return after 10 years? Because enough time has passed, Reeves replied. Old staff have retired, new security measures have gotten lax, and most importantly, people have started to forget. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jenny Martinez. Michael drew something new. You need to see this. 20 minutes later, they were back at Riverside Elementary. Jenny met them in Sarah's classroom, holding a large piece of paper. Michael's latest drawing showed the man in the fedora, but this time he was standing next to a van. The license plate was drawn with remarkable detail. He saw this today? Reeves asked, photographing the drawing. Jenny nodded. During afternoon recess, said the man was putting tools in his van. Chun was already on his phone. Running the plate now. A pause. Registered to a Richard Henderson. Address in Lakeville. That's halfway between our schools, Reeves said. Perfect central location. She turned to Sarah. We need to move carefully. If he suspects we're onto him, he'll disappear again, Sarah finished. Like last time, as if on cue, they heard the distant rumble of a van starting up in the staff parking lot. Chun rushed to the window just in time to see a white van pulling away from the school. I want surveillance on that address in Lakeville, Reeves ordered, already heading for the door. And I want background checks on every maintenance worker hired in the county in the past 6 months. After they left, Sarah stood at her classroom window, watching the empty playground where Michael had made his crucial observation. The late afternoon sun stretched the shadows of the playground equipment across the asphalt, creating dark shapes that seemed to reach toward the school like grasping fingers. She thought about Michael, about his quiet attention to detail, about how children see what adults train themselves to ignore. Tomorrow, Hayes, or whatever his real name was, would return as usual, pretending to trim hedges and rake leaves. But now they would be watching him just as carefully as he had been watching them. The question was, could they catch him before he realized he'd been noticed by the very children he thought he was invisibly observing? The maintenance shed at Riverside Elementary stood in the far corner of the property, a weathered building that had witnessed decades of school history. On this particular morning, Richard Hayes organized his tools with methodical precision, each item arranged exactly as it had been the day before. Sarah watched from her classroom window as he emerged, pushing his wheelbarrow with deliberate steps. Today was different. Today she noticed how he subtly altered his path to pass by the playground, how his head turned slightly to scan the area, how he lingered just a moment too long near the fence. Ms. Anderson? Michael's voice pulled her attention back to the classroom. He stood at her desk, another drawing in his hand. He's different today. The drawing showed the man in the fedora, but his posture had changed. Instead of the usual stance, he was crouching, as if hiding behind the shrubs. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Different how, Michael? He knows we see him, Michael said simply, then returned to his seat. Detective Reeves had positioned plainclothes officers around the school perimeter, but Hayes showed no sign of awareness. He worked methodically, trimming hedges with practiced efficiency, occasionally stopping to make notes in a small notebook he carried. During morning recess, Sarah sat with Jenny at the picnic tables, trying to appear casual while watching Hayes work. Michael sat nearby, drawing as usual. Notice anything? Jenny asked quietly. He's documenting something, Sarah replied, pretending to grade papers. Every few minutes, he writes in that notebook. Through her peripheral vision, she saw Hayes check his watch, make another note, then move to a new position, one that gave him a clear view of the playground entrance. Officer Chun appeared beside their table, wearing civilian clothes. We've got surveillance photos from his house in Lakeville, he said softly. Detective Reeves is reviewing them now. You should see this. He slid a phone across the table. The photo showed Hayes's garage wall covered in maps, detailed layouts of various schools in the county, each marked with colored pins and notes. Those aren't just maps, Sarah whispered. They're escape routes. Look at how he's marked the access roads, the less monitored areas. A shadow fell across their table. Hayes stood nearby, pruning shears in hand, adjusting his hat against the sun. Morning, he said pleasantly. Lovely day for the children to be out. His voice was smooth, unremarkable, the kind that wouldn't stand out in memory. But something in his eyes made Sarah's skin crawl. They were too alert, too calculating behind their friendly facade. Indeed it is, Jenny replied with a forced smile. Hayes glanced at Michael's drawing, and for a moment, his pleasant mask slipped. Something dark flickered across his features before he turned away, pushing his wheelbarrow toward the shed. Later that afternoon, Sarah received an urgent text from Reeves. Found something. Meeting at station, 6 p.m. The evidence room at the Burlington Police Department was crowded with detectives and analysts when Sarah arrived. Reeves stood before a board covered in new photographs. We searched his van, she announced without preamble. Found these hidden under the spare tire. She pointed to photographs spread across the table, surveillance photos of different schools, children at play, detailed notes about schedules and security patterns. But this is what concerns me most. She held up Hayes's notebook, recovered from his workbench. It's all here, every security guard's rotation, every teacher's schedule, every camera's blind spot. He's been planning this for months. There's more, Chin added. We found old newspapers in his garage. Articles about the disappearances from 10 years ago. He's been keeping them like trophies. Sarah studied the photographs, her teachers noting details others might miss. These recent photos, they're all of children who stay late after school. The ones whose parents work longer hours. Vulnerable targets, Reeves confirmed grimly. Just like last time. But we can't arrest him yet, Chin said, frustration evident in his voice. We don't have enough to hold him. These photos, while suspicious, aren't illegal. The maps could be explained away as part of his job. So we watch him, Reeves replied, and we wait for him to make a mistake. Because people like Hayes, they always make mistakes. Their confidence grows, they get sloppy. As Sarah drove home that night, she thought about Michael's latest drawing, the man crouching, hiding, aware he was being watched. Somehow, the child had sensed the change in Hayes before any of them. Tomorrow, Hayes would return to his routine, unaware that his every move was now being documented as meticulously as he had documented others. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Because if Michael was right, if Hayes knew he'd been noticed, then he might decide to act sooner rather than later. And this time, they couldn't afford to let him disappear again. Detective Reeves sat at her desk at 3 a.m., surrounded by 10 years' worth of evidence. Her computer screen glowed with employment records from various school districts, while her desk was covered with photographs, both old and new. She rubbed her tired eyes, then reached for her now cold coffee. A pattern was emerging, but it was like looking at a constellation. The stars only formed a picture if you knew how to connect them. Her phone buzzed. A text from the surveillance team at Hayes's house. Subject leaving residence. 3:12 a.m. She immediately dialed Chin. He's moving. Where's he supposed to be working today? Riverside in the morning, then Oak Ridge Elementary in the afternoon. Chun replied, sounding fully awake despite the hour. But if he's out this early, he's doing something else, Reeves finished. Get a team to follow him, but at a distance. He's been doing this too long to not notice a tail. The next few hours revealed a disturbing pattern. Hayes drove to 5 different schools in the county, spending exactly 12 minutes at each one, always parking in spots hidden from security cameras. At each location, he walked the perimeter, taking notes and occasionally photographing entry points. By the time Sarah arrived at Riverside Elementary that morning, Hayes was already there, working on the grounds as if he hadn't spent the pre-dawn hours conducting surveillance of other schools. He's planning multiple sites, Reeves told Sarah during their hurried meeting in the teacher's lounge. Just like last time, he doesn't want to hit the same area twice. It spreads out the investigation, makes it harder to connect the dots. Sarah watched through the window as Hayes trimmed the hedges near the playground. But why come back here? After 10 years, why risk returning to the same county? Because it worked, Chun said, joining them. He got away with it. And people like Hayes, they're creatures of habit. They return to what works. A knock at the door made them all jump. Jenny stood there with Michael's latest drawing. This one showed the man in the fedora standing near a door, a specific door, one that Sarah recognized immediately. That's the old service entrance, she said, taking the drawing. It was sealed off years ago during renovations. How would Michael even know about it? Because Hayes has been studying it, Reeves replied. Look at the angle of this drawing. It's from the picnic table where Michael sits. He's been watching Hayes watch the school. Chun was already on his radio, requesting additional surveillance of the sealed entrance. But Sarah was studying another detail in the drawing. A small rectangle in the man's hand that looked like a phone or a camera. That afternoon, while the children were in art class, Sarah and Chun examined the old service entrance. Hidden behind overgrown bushes, they found fresh scrape marks around the door frame. He's been testing it, Chun said, photographing the marks. Checking if it can be opened. Sarah felt sick. The renovations. They just covered the old door with new siding. The actual lock mechanism might still work. Back in the surveillance van, Reeves was reviewing footage from the hidden cameras they'd installed around the school. Hayes appeared in frame after frame, each time positioning himself to observe different areas of the school grounds. But it was what he did while watching that caught her attention. "Look at this," she said, freezing a frame. Hayes was holding something small and black, exactly like the object in Michael's drawing. He's not just watching, he's recording, building a digital blueprint of every school's routine. Sarah thought about Michael, about his ability to capture details that adults missed. "He draws what he sees," she said slowly. "Not just the man, but what the man is doing. Every drawing has been a piece of evidence we didn't know we needed." As if to confirm her words, Jenny appeared at the van's door with another drawing. This one showed the man in the fedora standing next to his van. But Michael had drawn something new, an open back door revealing what looked like computer screens inside. "A mobile surveillance center," Reeves breathed. "That's how he monitors multiple schools at once. We need to move on that van." But when they reached the staff parking lot, the van was gone. Hayes had left early, citing a doctor's appointment. "He's accelerating his timeline," Reeves said, already calling for units to monitor Hayes's house. "He knows something's wrong. Children notice things, and he's realized Michael's been watching him." That night, as Sarah prepared to leave school, she found one final drawing on her desk. The man in the fedora was standing by the old service entrance again. But this time Michael had drawn children's shoes scattered on the ground behind him. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what the drawing meant. Hayes wasn't just planning, he was ready. And they were running out of time to stop him. An early morning storm lashed against the windows of the Burlington Police Department as Detective Reeves briefed her team. Lightning flashes illuminated the evidence wall, where Michael's drawings now formed a disturbing timeline of Hayes's activities. "Last night's surveillance confirms our worst fears," she said, pinning up photos from Hayes's house. "He's been moving equipment from his garage to his van. Computer monitors, recording devices, and this," she held up a photo of a small black case. "A signal jammer, capable of disrupting security systems and cell phones." Sarah sat quietly in the corner, thinking about the children's shoes in Michael's last drawing. The image haunted her, not just for what it depicted, but for what it suggested. Hayes was done watching. He was ready to act. "We've identified his pattern," Chen explained, pointing to a map marked with red pins. "He's been working between 5 schools, establishing routines at each one. But Riverside is different. It's the only school where he's been testing entry points, because it's familiar," Reeves added. "He knows the layout from 10 years ago. The renovations might have changed the surface, but the bones of the building are the same." A junior officer burst into the room. "Detective, Hayes just called in sick to all his school jobs. His van's gone, and he's not at his house." The room erupted into activity. Reeves immediately began issuing orders. "I want units at every school he's been working at. Chun, coordinate with school security. Nobody matching his description gets near any of those buildings." Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Jenny. "Michael just gave me another drawing. You need to see this now." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in her classroom, staring at Michael's latest work. The drawing showed the man in the fedora, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were 3 small figures, children, near what appeared to be a maintenance van. In the background, Michael had drawn dark storm clouds and rain. "When did he draw this?" Reeves demanded. "This morning, before classes started," Jenny replied. "He was waiting at my office when I arrived." Sarah looked out at the storm raging outside. The weather matched Michael's drawing exactly. "He's not just drawing what he sees anymore," she said quietly. "He's drawing what's about to happen." Reeves was already on her phone, redirecting units. The storm had given Hayes perfect cover, poor visibility. Most people rushing to get indoors, security cameras hampered by the rain. They gathered in the surveillance van, watching monitors showing various points around the school. The rain made everything hazy, transforming familiar shapes into indistinct shadows. There, Chun pointed to a screen. A figure in dark maintenance coveralls was walking near the old service entrance. head down against the rain, fedora pulled low. "That's not Hayes," Reeves said suddenly, leaning closer to the monitor. "The height is wrong. It's a diversion." Before she could finish speaking, alarms began blaring throughout the school. Security systems went dark, screens flickered, and radio communications filled with static. The signal jammer, Chun realized. But where? Sarah was already running toward her classroom. In the chaos of the alarm and the storm, she had noticed something the others had missed. Michael wasn't at his desk. She burst into the classroom to find it empty, but a new drawing lay on Michael's desk. It showed the sealed service entrance, but from the inside, as if the artist was standing in the dark hallway behind it. "He's inside the walls," Sarah breathed into her radio, hoping it could cut through the interference. The old maintenance tunnels. The renovation didn't seal them off, just covered the entrances. Hayes isn't trying to get in. He's already inside. The storm raged on as police units converged on the school. Somewhere in the forgotten spaces between walls, a predator who had waited 10 years was ready to strike again. And somewhere in those same shadows was a child who had seen him coming, who had tried to warn them all along through the only means he had, his drawings. The question now was whether they could decipher the final warning in time. The school's emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow through the hallways as Sarah ran toward the old maintenance wing, Detective Reeves and Officer Chun close behind. The storm's fury masked their footsteps, thunder drowning out everything but the pounding of their hearts. "The original blueprints," Sarah gasped as they ran. The maintenance tunnels were like a web under the old wing. They used them for heating and electrical access before the renovation. "Perfect hiding place," Reeves said grimly. He could have been mapping them for weeks. They reached the sealed entrance. Chun shone his flashlight on the floor, revealing scuff marks in the dust, small sneaker prints alongside larger boot impressions. Michael came willingly, Reeves observed. No signs of struggle, because he knew we'd follow the drawings, Sarah realized. He's been leaving us a trail all along. Behind the sealed door, they discovered that the renovation had been superficial plywood and new siding covering the original entrance. Chun made quick work of it with a crowbar, revealing a dark passage beyond. Their flashlight beams cut through decades of dust, illuminating a network of utility tunnels. The air was thick with the musty smell of abandoned spaces and recent disturbance. "Listen," Sarah whispered. In the distance, barely audible over the storm that raged above, came the soft hum of electronic equipment. They moved silently through the tunnels, following the sound. The passage twisted and branched, but fresh scuff marks in the dust led the way. After what felt like an eternity, they saw a faint blue glow spilling from around a corner. Reeves held up her hand, signaling them to stop. They could hear voices now. "You've been watching me draw you," Michael's voice, calm and clear. "Every day," Hayes replied softly. "Very talented artist, Michael. Very observant. Just like the others were. The other children. From before. Yes, they noticed me too. Children always do. Adults, they train themselves not to see, not to pay attention. But children see everything." Sarah peered around the corner. The tunnel opened into a small maintenance room, now filled with monitors showing security feeds from multiple schools. Hayes sat in front of the displays, Michael beside him, a sketchbook open between them. "Is that why you came back?" Michael asked. "To be seen again?" Hayes laughed softly. "You really are clever. Too clever. That's why." He never finished the sentence. In that moment, several things happened at once. Michael knocked over a bottle of water, shorting out Hayes' equipment. The monitors went dark, plunging the room into chaos. Hayes lunged for something in the shadows, a bag, Sarah realized later, probably containing evidence of his previous crimes. But Michael had already rolled under the desk, exactly as they had planned when he'd approached Jenny that morning, asking to help set a trap. Reeves and Chun burst in, flashlights and weapons trained on Hayes. In the confusion, he tried to reach an exit only he knew about, but found it already blocked by additional officers who had followed the building's original blueprints. "Richard Harrison Hayes," Reeves said, handcuffs glinting in the emergency lights. "You've been seen." Later, in the safety of Sarah's classroom, Michael added one final drawing to the evidence file. The man in the fedora, no longer standing tall, but sitting defeated in the back of a police car. "You knew he was watching you draw him," Sarah said quietly. Michael nodded. He needed to be seen. That's why he kept coming back. But he forgot something important. What's that? Sometimes, being seen is a trap. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to pass. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the playground, shadows that, for the first time in weeks, held no hidden watchers, no lurking threats. The man in the fedora had wanted to be seen. And in the end, that's exactly what brought him down, seen through the eyes of a child, captured in drawings that became evidence, tracked by adults who finally learned to notice what had been hiding in plain sight all along. Inside Hayes' garage, Detective Reeves moved with deliberate care as she opened a metal filing cabinet that had been concealed behind a false wall. The afternoon light filtering through the dusty windows illuminated decades of meticulously kept records. A historian's treasure trove of horror. 10 schools, she said, leafing through the folders. Not just the 5 we knew about. He'd been working at schools for years before the disappearances started. Sarah stood nearby, watching as forensics teams photographed the walls of maps and surveillance photos. In the harsh light of day, Hayes' planning room looked less like a command center and more like what it truly was, a shrine to obsession. "There's something else," Chun called from the corner. He was examining a laptop they'd found hidden in the ventilation system. School employment records going back to 2005. He didn't just work as maintenance staff. He was a substitute teacher in Ohio before moving here. Sarah felt her blood run cold. He had access to children in 2 different ways. And 2 different identities, Reeves added. Richard Harrison Hayes was his real name used for teaching. But there were others, Richard Henderson, Richard Hayworth. Those were his maintenance identities. In the basement, they found what they'd been dreading. A locked room containing small items, backpacks, shoes, hair ribbons, each carefully labeled with dates and locations. "Trophies," Reeves said quietly. "From all of them. Not just the 5 we knew about." The evidence painted a picture of a predator who had spent years perfecting his method. As a substitute teacher, he learned how schools operated, how security worked, how children behaved. But it was his maintenance jobs that gave him true invisibility, the ability to move unnoticed through school after school. Back at the station, Hayes sat in an interrogation room, his fedora placed on the table before him like a barrier between past and present. "Why come back?" Reeves asked. "After 10 years, why risk returning to the same area?" Hayes smiled faintly. "You assume I ever left." The investigation revealed the terrible truth. He hadn't disappeared after the 5th child. He'd simply moved to other districts, other states, always staying just ahead of suspicion. The fire that destroyed Riverside's personnel records hadn't been an accident. He'd returned periodically over the years, erasing traces of his past employment. The drawings, Sarah said during a late-night briefing. That's what rattled him. Being documented, being truly seen. He got careless, Reeves agreed. Started keeping trophies, staying too long in one place. Classic escalation pattern. As they pieced together Hayes' decades-long trail, families from across the country began receiving the calls they had both dreaded and hoped for. Their children were never coming home, but at least now they would know why. In Sarah's classroom, Michael's drawings had been carefully collected as evidence, each one now a piece of the puzzle that had finally brought Hayes to justice. But one drawing remained, the last one, showing not the predator, but his defeat. "You knew he was watching you draw?" Sarah said to Michael after his parents finished giving their statement to the police. "Someone had to see him," Michael replied simply. "Really see him. The way he wanted to be seen. That's how you catch monsters. You look at them until they can't hide anymore." Outside, maintenance workers were removing Hayes' hedges from around the playground, opening up sight lines, eliminating hiding spots. The school would be different now, more open, more watchful. But as Sarah watched Michael walk away with his parents, she realized something profound. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness isn't a gun or a badge, but the simple, unflinching gaze of a child who refuses to look away. The man in the fedora had finally been seen for what he truly was. And in being seen, he had lost his power to hide in plain sight. 1 year later, Sarah stood at her classroom window, watching children play in the updated playground. The old picnic tables had been replaced with new ones, positioned with clear sight lines to all areas. The sealed maintenance entrances were now permanently filled with concrete, and security cameras covered every angle of the school grounds. But the biggest changes weren't physical. "Ms. Anderson," Michael's voice called from the doorway. Now in 4th grade, he carried his ever-present sketchbook, but its pages were filled with different subjects, landscapes, classmates playing, the new garden the students had planted where Hayes's hedges once stood. "How's the art club going?" Sarah asked, smiling as he showed her his latest work, a bright, detailed drawing of children planting spring flowers. "We're doing an exhibition next week," he said proudly. "Mom says you should come." After Hayes's arrest, Michael's artistic talent had drawn attention from the school board. With their support, Riverside Elementary started an after-school art program, giving children a new way to express what they saw and felt. Michael was its first success story, his observational skills now celebrated rather than carrying the weight of uncovering darkness. Detective Reeves visited occasionally, keeping them updated on the case's ripple effects. Hayes's detailed records had led to solving dozens of cold cases across multiple states. Schools nationwide had revised their maintenance staff protocols, implementing stricter background checks and dual supervision requirements. But today was special. Sarah gathered her 3rd grade class for their weekly safety discussion. Not lectures about strangers, but conversations about trust, observation, and the importance of speaking up. "Remember," she told them, "you all have something special. You notice things adults sometimes miss. That's not scary. That's your superpower. And like all powers, it's meant to help people." In her desk drawer, she kept one of Michael's last drawings of the man in the fedora. Not as a reminder of fear, but as proof that evil couldn't hide forever when enough people were brave enough to really look. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, creating patterns on the classroom floor. Children's laughter drifted in from the playground, no longer haunted by watching eyes. In the parking lot, a new maintenance worker, wearing a bright yellow safety vest instead of a fedora, waved cheerfully at the security camera before beginning his carefully documented rounds. Sarah thought about all the changes the past year had brought. The strengthened community bonds, the increased awareness, the way parents and teachers had learned to really listen to their children. Hayes had left scars on many communities, but in exposing his methods, they had also exposed the cracks he'd exploited, cracks that were now being sealed with vigilance and understanding. Later that afternoon, as Sarah packed up for the day, she noticed something on her desk, a new drawing from Michael. It showed the school as it was now, bright, open, filled with playing children. In the corner, he'd written something that made her smile. "Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we pretend not to see, but they can't hide if we all keep looking." She pinned the drawing to her board, a reminder that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning, growing, and making sure that what was once hidden in shadow is now seen in full daylight. Outside, the late spring sun painted long shadows across the playground, but they were just shadows now, nothing more, nothing less. The man in the fedora was gone, and in his place was something stronger, a community that had learned to keep its eyes open and its children close. The monsters might still exist in the world, but they would find no shelter here. Not anymore. Not when everyone, especially the children, knew the power of really seeing. Boy uses his last money to buy his brother a gift for Christmas. What he gets in return leaves him speechless. On a frosty December morning in the quaint town of Maplewood, the sun struggled to pierce the thick blanket of clouds. Daniel, a lanky boy of 11, tucked his hands into the frayed pockets of his coat. He clutched a few crumpled bills, his meager savings from odd jobs, and stepped into the town's bustling marketplace. Christmas is just around the corner, vendors shouted, their stalls brimming with wreaths, ornaments, and colorful trinkets. Yet, Daniel's eyes were fixed on a wooden toy train displayed in the corner of a modest shop. It wasn't for him, it was for his younger brother, Timmy. Timmy's illness had kept him indoors for months. His room, though filled with love, was devoid of the magic every child deserved during Christmas. Daniel wanted to change that. The toy train wasn't much, but to Timmy, it would mean the world. He pushed open the door to the shop, the bell above jingling softly. Kind, elderly shopkeeper greeted him. "That train caught your eye?" The man asked, his voice warm but weathered. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied, trying to hide his nervousness. "How much is it?" The shopkeeper hesitated before naming the price. It was just a little beyond what Daniel had. Biting his lip, the boy placed his money on the counter. "This is all I have," he admitted, his voice trembling. "It's for my brother." The shopkeeper studied him for a long moment. Then, with a smile, he slid the train across the counter. "It's yours." Daniel's eyes widened. "But I didn't." "Consider it a Christmas miracle," the man interrupted. "Take it, lad." Grateful, Daniel clutched the train to his chest and thanked the shopkeeper profusely. As he stepped back out into the cold, the first snowflakes began to fall, dusting the town in a blanket of white. As Daniel made his way home, he didn't notice the pair of eyes watching him from across the street. A young woman, cloaked in a deep green shawl. Her face, though unfamiliar, held a peculiar tenderness as she followed him from a distance. When Daniel returned to the modest cottage he shared with Timmy and their mother, he was greeted by the sound of Timmy's laughter, a rarity these days. The boy ran upstairs and carefully wrapped the train, his heart swelling with anticipation. That night, the family gathered around their small Christmas tree. Timmy coughed softly but smiled brightly as Daniel whispered, "Tomorrow will be the best day yet, Timmy." Little did Daniel know, the mysterious woman had a hand in ensuring that this Christmas would be unlike any other, bringing with her a revelation that would leave the family speechless. The next morning, the scent of pine from the modest Christmas tree filled the tiny cottage. Daniel woke early, the winter sun casting a golden glow through the frost-laced windows. He tiptoed to Timmy's room and placed the neatly wrapped toy train by his brother's bedside. Timmy stirred, his pale face lighting up as he saw Daniel sitting beside him. "Merry Christmas, Timmy," Daniel said, ruffling his little brother's hair. Timmy reached for the gift with trembling hands. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Open it and see," Daniel said, his excitement barely contained. As Timmy unwrapped the package, his eyes sparkled with joy. The wooden train gleamed in the sunlight, its bright red and blue paint flawless, its craftsmanship exquisite. He hugged the toy close, his frail arms trembling with gratitude. "I love it, Daniel," Timmy exclaimed, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Thank you." Their mother appeared in the doorway, her tired face softening at the sight of her sons. "What's all this?" she asked, though her eyes had already welled up. "I saved for it," Daniel said proudly, standing tall despite his patched coat and worn boots. "Timmy deserves something special." Their mother knelt and kissed Daniel's forehead. "You're a blessing," she whispered. Later that afternoon, the family sat together for a modest Christmas meal. A knock at the door interrupted their laughter. Daniel and his mother exchanged puzzled glances. Visitors were rare in their quiet corner of Maplewood. Daniel opened the door to find the young woman with the green shawl standing there, holding a small box tied with a crimson ribbon. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her warm smile softened her sharp features. "Hello," she greeted, her voice gentle. "I hope I'm not intruding. My name is Clara. I believe we have something to discuss." Daniel blinked, confused. "Do I know you?" Clara shook her head. "Not yet, but you showed great kindness yesterday. I'd like to return it." She stepped into the tiny cottage at their mother's invitation. The family gathered around as Clara placed the box on the table. "I saw you buying the toy train," she said, addressing Daniel. "What you did for your brother touched my heart." I just wanted Timmy to smile," Daniel replied, feeling suddenly shy. Clara nodded, her eyes brimming with emotion. "That's why I'm here. You see, kindness has a way of coming full circle." She gestured to the box. "Open it, Timmy," still clutching his train, reached for the ribbon with unsteady hands. With his mother's help, he untied the bow and lifted the lid. Inside was a delicate, hand-carved ornament of an angel, its wings shimmering as if dusted with frost. "This angel belongs to your family now," Clara said. "It brings hope to those who truly need it. But there's more." She reached into her shawl and produced an envelope. "This is for you," she said, handing it to Daniel's mother. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a letter and a banknote far larger than any amount they'd ever seen. Tears sprang to her eyes as she read. This is enough to cover Timmy's treatment." Clara nodded. "I've been blessed in life, and I want to share that blessing with those who deserve it." As the family sat in stunned silence, Clara continued. "Years ago, someone saved me when I was lost and alone. I promised to honor that kindness by helping others. Watching Daniel yesterday, I knew I'd found the right family." Daniel's mother tried to speak, but words failed her. She simply embraced Clara, her gratitude overflowing. Timmy, too, reached for Clara's hand, his small voice saying, "Thank you." Clara smiled through her own tears. "Your family's love is its own miracle. I'm just helping it grow." As the evening wore on, Clara stayed to share stories and laughter with the family. Outside, the snow fell gently, blanketing Maplewood in a serene glow. Daniel, looking at Timmy's radiant face and his mother's relieved smile, felt something shift in his heart. The world seemed a little brighter, not just because of the angel on the table, but because of the promise of a new beginning. The room had grown quieter, the soft crackle of the fireplace filling the silence. Clara prepared to leave, her green shawl draped around her shoulders. Timmy, though still clutching his train, watched her with wide eyes. "Will you come back?" he asked, his voice filled with childlike wonder. Clara knelt beside him, tucking a stray lock of his hair behind his ear. "Perhaps," she said, smiling warmly. "But remember, the angel will always be here to watch over you." Daniel stepped forward, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Why us?" he asked, his tone more serious than his years. Clara looked at him, her expression soft yet purposeful. "Because you reminded me of someone I used to know. A boy who would give everything for those he loved." Daniel furrowed his brow. "What happened to him?" Clara hesitated, her gaze distant. "He grew up and faced struggles of his own. But he never stopped believing in miracles, just as you shouldn't." The snow had thickened by the time Clara stepped outside, her figure disappearing into the white haze. Daniel stood at the door, watching until she was out of sight. Questions swirled in his mind, but one thing was certain. Her visit had changed everything. Inside, their mother clutched the letter Clara had left. It wasn't just the money that moved her. It was the words. They spoke of resilience, of never losing faith even in the darkest times. "This is a second chance," she said, her voice trembling. "For all of us." The following days passed in a whirlwind. The family used the money to take Timmy to a specialist in a nearby city. For the first time in months, hope filled their hearts as the doctor assured them that Timmy's condition could improve with the right treatment. Daniel watched his brother during these visits, marveling at the spark returning to Timmy's eyes. Yet his thoughts often drifted to Clara. Who was she, really? And why had her kindness felt so deeply personal? One cold evening, while Timmy was resting after a particularly tiring therapy session, Daniel decided to investigate. He returned to the little shop where he'd bought the train. The elderly shopkeeper greeted him with the same warm smile. "Back again, young man?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied. "Do you know a woman named Clara? She wears a green shawl." The shopkeeper's face clouded with a mixture of surprise and sadness. "Clara? That's a name I haven't heard in years." Daniel leaned forward, intrigued. "You know her?" The shopkeeper nodded, his voice low. "She grew up in this town. Her family faced hard times, much like yours. But Clara had a gift for seeing beauty even in the bleakest moments. She left Maplewood a long time ago, though. Why did she come back?" Daniel pressed. The shopkeeper's eyes twinkled with something close to wonder. "I suspect she hasn't forgotten her roots. Clara always said she'd return to give back." Seems she's kept her promise. That night, Daniel shared what he'd learned with his mother. She listened quietly, her fingers brushing the carved angel on their table. "She gave us more than money," she said softly. "She gave us the gift of hope." As days turned into weeks, Timmy's strength grew. His laughter, once faint and infrequent, now filled their home. The carved angel, sitting atop their mantel, became a symbol of their renewed faith. But Clara's gift had stirred something in Daniel too, a determination to one day repay her kindness, not just to her but to anyone in need. He didn't yet know how, but deep in his heart, he knew that the story wasn't over. The winter days gradually grew longer, the snow softening into slush beneath the gentle warmth of the January sun. At home, the family's life had taken a brighter turn. Timmy's cheeks had regained their rosy hue, and his laughter became a familiar sound in their cottage. His toy train rattled across the floor every morning, a testament to the boy's recovering strength. Yet Daniel found himself restless. Clara's mysterious visit lingered in his thoughts, and her words replayed in his mind. He often stood at the window late into the night, gazing at the stars and wondering about the woman who had brought so much light into their lives. One evening, as Timmy dozed off with his train beside him, Daniel sat with his mother near the fireplace. The carved angel glimmered faintly in the firelight. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. His mother, mending one of Timmy's sweaters, paused. "I don't know, Daniel. Clara's kindness was a gift, not a promise. But I believe we'll see her again when the time is right." Daniel's gaze shifted to the angel. "She said it would watch over us. Do you think it's true?" His mother smiled faintly. "I believe it's a reminder, Daniel. A reminder that miracles happen when we least expect them." The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He would seek out Clara. He felt a pull, as if there was more to her story that he needed to understand. Bundling himself in his patched coat, he kissed Timmy on the forehead and promised to return before dark. His journey began in town. He revisited the marketplace, asking vendors if they'd seen a woman with a green shawl. Most shook their heads, but a florist remembered something. "She bought flowers a week ago," the woman said, pointing toward the church. Headed in that direction, Daniel hurried to the church, its tall steeple piercing the gray sky. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of incense. Candles flickered in rows, their light casting soft shadows on the stone walls. A priest, kneeling near the altar, looked up as Daniel approached. "Can I help you, son?" "I'm looking for someone," Daniel said hesitantly. "Her name is Clara. She wears a green shawl." The priest's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Ah, Clara. She was here a few days ago, praying quietly. A generous soul, that one. Do you know where she lives?" Daniel asked eagerly. The priest shook his head. "I'm afraid I don't. But she left this." He retrieved a small envelope from the altar and handed it to Daniel. "She asked me to pass it on to the boy with the kind heart. Should he come looking?" Daniel's heart raced as he tore open the envelope. Inside was a simple note. "The path forward is always brighter than the road behind. You have all you need within you to bring light to others. Trust in that and we'll meet again someday." Below the message was a single address. It was a small house on the outskirts of town, nestled among bare trees dusted with snow. Daniel hesitated at the gate, his breath visible in the crisp air. Gathering his courage, he knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with kind eyes. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Clara," Daniel said. The man's face softened. "Clara was my sister." Daniel's heart sank. "Was?" The man nodded. "She passed away 3 years ago." The revelation hit Daniel like a gust of icy wind. "But I just saw her," he stammered. "She came to my house. She helped us." The man smiled faintly, his gaze distant. "That sounds like Clara. She always had a way of touching lives, even from beyond." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. "But how? Why?" "She believed that love and kindness leave ripples," the man said. "Maybe you were meant to be one of her ripples." Daniel looked down at the carved angel in his hand. now more luminous than ever. For the first time, he truly understood its meaning. Clara's gift wasn't just about healing his family. It was about inspiring him to carry her legacy forward. As Daniel walked back home, the snow began to fall gently. The world seemed quieter, yet fuller, as if every flake carried a message of hope. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. Clara's miracle wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far greater. The days after Daniel's visit to Clara's brother passed like a dream, as if the winter chill itself whispered the mysteries he had uncovered. Back home, Timmy's laughter filled the air, but Daniel carried the weight of the revelation like a secret flame, warming his resolve. Clara was gone, but her spirit lived on, woven into his family's newfound hope and the angel's watchful presence. He couldn't stop thinking about what her brother had said. Love and kindness leave ripples. It was on one of these reflective mornings that Daniel decided he wouldn't let the ripple end with him. If Clara had chosen to intervene in their lives, perhaps it was a sign that he, too, was meant to bring light to others. Daniel's first act of kindness came naturally. While walking through the marketplace, he noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry a bundle of firewood. Without hesitation, he ran to her side. "Let me help you, ma'am," he offered, taking the heavy bundle. The woman smiled, her weathered face brightening. "Why, thank you, young man. Not many stop to help these days." As Daniel walked with her to her cottage at the edge of town, she shared stories of her late husband, who had once been a kind soul much like Daniel. By the time they reached her door, the woman insisted he take a small loaf of bread as a token of gratitude. Daniel tried to refuse, but her persistence matched his humility. Word of Daniel's kindness began to spread. Soon, he found himself helping neighbors with small errands, shoveling snow for the elderly, and even tutoring younger children who struggled with their studies. Though his days were busier, his heart felt lighter with each act of generosity. Back at home, Timmy's health continued to improve. His cheeks were now full of color, and he had started venturing outside to play in the snow. Their mother, too, seemed rejuvenated. Her tired eyes replaced with a spark of pride as she watched her boys thrive. "Clara was right," she said one evening, her voice soft as she watched Daniel craft a wooden toy for Timmy. "You do have everything you need within you to bring light to others." Daniel paused, his hands covered in sawdust. "I just wish I could thank her again." "She'd be proud of you," his mother said. "And I believe somehow she knows." The carved angel, now perched on their mantle, seemed to radiate a quiet energy. It became a source of comfort for the family, a reminder that they were never alone. But for Daniel, it was more than a symbol, it was a call to action. One snowy evening, Daniel stood before the angel, gazing at its delicate features. "I'll do more," he whispered. "I promise." That promise would soon be tested in ways Daniel couldn't have foreseen. The town of Maplewood was small but tightly knit. When news spread of a fire that had consumed a neighbor's barn, Daniel didn't hesitate to offer his help. The family who owned the barn, the Millers, had lost not only their livelihood but also their savings, which had been hidden inside. Daniel rallied a group of boys his age and some local tradesmen to help rebuild the barn. He worked tirelessly, cutting wood, hammering nails, and even giving up his own small savings to contribute to the reconstruction. Despite the freezing temperatures, his determination never wavered. Weeks later, when the barn stood tall once more, the Millers invited Daniel and the others to a simple meal as a thank you. As they sat around the table, the warmth of the community's gratitude filled the room. "You've done more for us than we could ever repay," Mr. Miller said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's what Clara would have wanted," Daniel replied, surprising even himself with the words. That night, as Daniel walked home beneath a sky blanketed with stars, he felt something shift within him. The path forward wasn't just brighter, it was clearer. Clara's legacy wasn't a fleeting moment of kindness. It was a mission, and it was now his own. The winter began to relent, giving way to early signs of spring. Tiny buds peeked through the snow-dusted branches, and the air, though still crisp, carried the faint scent of renewal. Maplewood thrived in the change, and so did its people. Timmy now spent his days outdoors, his laughter mingling with the chirping of returning birds. His toy train, though cherished, was no longer his only companion. Daniel had carved him a set of wooden animals to accompany it. Their mother, no longer weighed down by fear and worry, spent her mornings humming while tending to their little garden. But for Daniel, the shifting seasons brought with them a growing restlessness. Helping his neighbors had become second nature, but something inside him urged him to do more. Clara's words, scrawled on the note she had left, echoed in his mind. The path forward is always brighter than the road behind. One evening, as the family gathered around the hearth, there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find Mr. Miller standing there, his broad figure framed by the dim light of the setting sun. "Daniel," Mr. Miller said, his tone a mix of urgency and gratitude. "I need your help." Daniel nodded immediately. "Of course, Mr. Miller. What's wrong?" The older man hesitated, his weathered hands gripping his hat. "It's about the Jenkins family. They live out near the woods. Their eldest boy, Sam, fell ill during the winter. They've struggled to care for him, and now their crops are failing. They won't ask for help, but I know they're in trouble." Daniel's heart sank. The Jenkins family had always been quiet, keeping to themselves on the edge of town. He didn't know them well, but the idea of them suffering in silence struck a chord deep within him. "I'll go," Daniel said without hesitation. The next morning, Daniel packed a small bag with bread, blankets, and a few of Timmy's carved toys. He made the trek through the woods, the snow crunching beneath his boots, until he reached the Jenkins' modest cabin. The sight before him was humbling. The cabin was sturdy but small, its roof patched with uneven shingles. Smoke trickled weakly from the chimney, and the windows were fogged, hinting at the cold that likely seeped inside. Daniel knocked, and the door creaked open to reveal a woman with tired eyes and a strained smile. "Hello, Mrs. Jenkins," Daniel said, his voice steady but warm. "I'm Daniel, from town. I heard about Sam, and I'd like to help." Mrs. Jenkins hesitated, her gaze flitting between Daniel's earnest face and the bag slung over his shoulder. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in, dear." Inside, the cabin was dimly lit but tidy. Sam lay on a cot near the fire, his face pale and his breathing shallow. His younger siblings sat on the floor, their wide eyes watching Daniel curiously. Daniel crouched beside Sam and placed a hand on his arm. "Hey, Sam," he said gently. "I brought some things for you and your family." Sam managed a faint smile, his strength too depleted for more. Daniel unpacked the bread and blankets, handing them to Mrs. Jenkins, who murmured her thanks with tears in her eyes. Then he turned to the younger children, giving them the carved toys. "Here," he said, his smile widening as their faces lit up. "I thought you might like these." For the next few days, Daniel returned to the Jenkins cabin, bringing supplies and helping with chores. He repaired a broken fence, fetched water from the nearby stream, and even coaxed the youngest Jenkins to smile with stories about Timmy's adventures. Mrs. Jenkins, though initially hesitant, began to open up. "We didn't want to burden anyone," she admitted one evening as they worked side by side to mend a broken chair. "But I see now that pride can't feed or heal my children." Daniel nodded. "My family struggled too, but someone helped us. Now it's my turn." By the time the week ended, Sam was sitting up, color returning to his cheeks. Mrs. Jenkins, though still wary of the road ahead, stood taller, her burdens lighter with Daniel's help. Before he left, she pressed his hands in hers. "You're a gift, Daniel," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've brought hope to this home." Daniel glanced at the carved angel in his pocket, feeling its smooth edges beneath his fingers. "It's not just me," he said softly. "It's what we're all meant to do. Help each other." Walking back through the woods, Daniel felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. Clara's ripple was growing, spreading far beyond what even she might have imagined. And though he still missed her presence, he understood now that she was never truly gone. Her spirit lived on in every act of kindness, in every smile he helped restore. Spring unfolded fully in Maplewood. bringing with it blooming flowers and a gentle warmth that chased away the last remnants of winter. The Jenkins family had found stability, and word of Daniel's efforts continued to spread through the town. Neighbors greeted him warmly, often offering small tokens of gratitude. A basket of eggs, a loaf of fresh bread, or even a simple thank you that warmed his heart more than anything tangible. One day, as Daniel worked in the garden alongside his mother and Timmy, a visitor arrived. It was Clara's brother, the same man Daniel had met during his search for her. He carried a satchel slung over his shoulder and a knowing smile on his face. "Daniel," he called out, stopping at the garden gate. "May I have a word?" Daniel rose, brushing dirt from his hands. "Of course," he said, gesturing for him to come in. Clara's brother stepped closer, his gaze warm yet intent. "I've heard about what you've been doing," he began, "helping the Millers, the Jenkins, and others in town." Clara would have been proud. Daniel's heart swelled at the words. I wanted to carry on what she started," he said earnestly. "That's why I'm here." The man reached into his satchel and pulled out a worn leather journal. This belonged to Clara. She filled it with her thoughts, her dreams, and the things that inspired her. "I think it's time it found its way to you." Daniel took the journal with reverence, its weight more than physical. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That evening, after Timmy had gone to bed, Daniel sat by the fire, the journal resting on his lap. He opened it carefully, the pages filled with Clara's elegant handwriting. Each entry seemed to breathe with her spirit, offering glimpses into her life and her unwavering belief in the power of kindness. One entry caught his eye. "Kindness is the bridge between despair and hope. It costs nothing, yet it's worth everything." Daniel ran his fingers over the words, feeling their truth resonate deeply. As he turned the pages, another entry stopped him. "There's a boy I once knew. He had a light in him even in the darkest of times. I hope that light still burns bright and that one day, he'll know he's never alone." Tears pricked Daniel's eyes as he realized she had written about him. Though she hadn't known his name then, Clara had seen something in him even as a child. She had carried that memory, nurturing it until their paths crossed again. The journal became a constant source of inspiration for Daniel. Its pages guided him, giving him strength on days when doubt crept in. He shared its lessons with Timmy, who listened wide-eyed, soaking in the wisdom of the woman who had changed their lives. One day, Timmy asked, "Do you think we'll ever see Clara again?" Daniel hesitated, then smiled. "I think Clara's with us every day, Timmy. In the way we help others, in the way we care for each other. That's how she'll always be here." The next few months brought new challenges and new opportunities for kindness. When a storm damaged the roof of the town schoolhouse, Daniel organized a group to repair it. When a new family moved to Maplewood with little to their name, Daniel was the first to welcome them, offering supplies and comfort. Through it all, the carved angel remained on their mantle, a quiet reminder of the miracle that had set everything in motion. Daniel often wondered if the angel itself carried a bit of Clara's essence, guiding him in ways he couldn't quite explain. One evening, as the golden hues of sunset bathed their cottage, Timmy sat carving a toy of his own. He had taken up the craft, mimicking his older brother's careful movements. Their mother watched from her chair, a look of contentment on her face. "Daniel," she said suddenly, her voice thoughtful, "have you ever considered what you want to do when you're older?" Daniel paused, the question catching him off guard. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think I'd like to keep helping people. Maybe find a way to do it even on a larger scale." His mother nodded, her smile soft. "You've already started. Whatever path you choose, I know it'll be one that makes Clara proud." Daniel looked at the angel, its carved wings seeming to shimmer in the firelight. For the first time, he felt not just the weight of his responsibility but the joy of his purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew one thing. He was ready to walk it, carrying Clara's legacy and his own light into the world. The seasons shifted, and Maplewood blossomed into summer. The sun bathed the small town in golden light, and laughter filled the streets as children played and neighbors gathered. But Daniel's days were never idle. There was always someone to help, a problem to solve, or simply a friend in need of encouragement. One humid morning, Daniel woke to find a small crowd gathered outside his cottage. At the front stood Mr. Graham, the town's mayor, flanked by other prominent townsfolk. "Daniel," Mr. Graham said, tipping his hat as Daniel stepped onto the porch. "We've all been talking, and we feel it's time to do something for you." Daniel blinked, surprised. "For me? I don't need anything," the mayor chuckled. "That's exactly why you deserve it, son. You've given so much to this town, and it's only right that we give something back." Behind him, a woman stepped forward holding a stack of papers. "We've started a fund," she explained. "It's not much yet, but it's enough to get you started if you ever want to expand your efforts. Maybe open a workshop or organize more projects." Daniel's heart swelled. "I don't know what to say," he said, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Say you'll keep doing what you're doing," Mr. Graham said with a warm smile. "That's all we ask." The idea of a workshop stuck with Daniel. Over the next few weeks, he worked tirelessly to refurbish an old barn on the edge of town. With the help of friends and neighbors, the space transformed into a vibrant community hub. Shelves lined with tools and supplies filled one corner, while another held rows of simple wooden tables for crafting and repairing. Timmy was his constant shadow, eager to learn and lend a hand. "What will you call it?" he asked one afternoon, as they painted a sign for the entrance. Daniel thought for a moment, then smiled. "The Ripple Workshop," he said, "because every act of kindness creates a ripple." Timmy beamed. Clara would love that. The workshop became a beacon in Maplewood. Neighbors brought broken furniture, old tools and worn toys, and Daniel, along with a growing team of volunteers, gave them new life. More than that, the space became a place for sharing stories, teaching skills, and fostering the sense of community that Daniel had always believed in. One evening, as Daniel closed up the workshop, he noticed a figure standing in the doorway. It was Clara's brother, his face alight with pride. "You've built something remarkable here," he said. "It's not just me," Daniel replied. "It's everyone." The man nodded, then handed Daniel a small package. "This belonged to Clara. She would have wanted you to have it." Inside was a delicate locket. When Daniel opened it, he found a tiny photograph of Clara, her warm smile frozen in time, and a simple inscription: "Love is the only legacy." Daniel wore the locket every day after that, tucked beneath his shirt. It wasn't just a reminder of Clara. It was a symbol of the path she had set him on, a path he now walked with purpose. As summer faded into autumn, the Ripple Workshop flourished. Families who had once been strangers now worked side by side, sharing laughter and lending hands. Timmy, now stronger and more confident, led his own small projects, inspiring the younger children to follow his lead. But one crisp afternoon, as Daniel swept the workshop floor, a man he didn't recognize stepped through the door. His suit was tailored, his expression serious, yet there was a softness in his eyes. "Daniel?" the man asked. "Yes, that's me," Daniel said, setting down the broom. "Can I help you?" The man extended a hand. "My name is Mr. Fletcher. I represent the foundation Clara established before she passed. We've been following your work." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Clara had a foundation?" "She did," Mr. Fletcher confirmed. "And her final wish was to find someone who could carry on her mission. After hearing about all you've done, I believe you're that person." Daniel listened in stunned silence as Mr. Fletcher explained that the foundation wanted to partner with the Ripple Workshop, offering resources to expand its reach beyond Maplewood. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like this," Daniel admitted, his mind spinning with possibilities. Mr. Fletcher smiled. "If Clara believed in you, that's all the assurance I need." That night, as Daniel sat by the fire with his family, he shared the news. Timmy was ecstatic, and their mother's eyes brimmed with tears. "Do you think Clara knew this would happen?" Daniel asked, staring at the carved angel on the mantel. His mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "She believed in you, Daniel. And now it's time for you to believe in yourself." As Daniel looked at the locket, its inscription echoing in his mind, he felt a quiet resolve take root. Clara's ripple had reached him, and now it was his turn to let it spread far and wide. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. With the backing of Clara's foundation, the Ripple Workshop expanded rapidly. Daniel traveled to nearby towns, spreading the message of community and kindness. He held gatherings, teaching people how to repair and repurpose, and inspiring them to create their own ripples of goodwill. Back in Maplewood, the workshop grew into a bustling hub. A new wing was added, housing classrooms where skills like carpentry, sewing, and farming techniques were taught. Timmy often led the children's sessions, showing them how to carve toys and create art from scraps. His joy was infectious, and his health, once frail, seemed stronger than ever. Despite the overwhelming success, Daniel often found moments of quiet to reflect. On one such evening, as he sat by the fire with the journal Clara had left him, he came across an entry he hadn't noticed before. It read, "The smallest light can pierce the darkest night. We must nurture that light, not for ourselves but for those who have yet to find their way." The words resonated deeply, especially as Daniel prepared for what lay ahead. A meeting with the Foundation's board to discuss expanding their work to cities far beyond Maplewood. The day of the meeting arrived, and Daniel felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Mr. Fletcher met him at the Foundation's headquarters, a grand building in the heart of a bustling city. The board members listened intently as Daniel shared his vision of community-driven kindness. When he finished, there was a pause before one of the members. An older woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile spoke. "What you've built is extraordinary, Daniel. But how do you plan to sustain it as it grows?" Daniel hesitated, then drew courage from Clara's teachings. "By empowering others to carry the mission forward," he said. "The Ripple Workshop isn't about me. It's about everyone realizing they have the power to make a difference." The room erupted in applause, and Daniel knew he had their support. The Foundation pledged additional resources, promising to help Daniel take his work to a national level. When Daniel returned to Maplewood that evening, the entire town had gathered at the workshop to celebrate. Lanterns hung from the trees, and laughter echoed through the crisp autumn air. Mr. Graham raised a toast, his voice carrying over the crowd. To Daniel, he declared, "And to the ripple that started right here in Maplewood." Cheers erupted, but Daniel shook his head, raising his own glass. "To all of you," he said, "this is our ripple. Clara gave us hope, and now it's our turn to share it with the world." As the night wore on, Daniel found himself standing alone beneath the stars, the carved angel in his hand. He thought of Clara, her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in the goodness of people. "I hope I'm making you proud," he whispered. A soft breeze stirred the leaves around him, and for a moment, he thought he heard her voice, faint but unmistakable. "You are." The following weeks saw Daniel and his team launching workshops in neighboring towns, each one echoing the spirit of the original. At every stop, he carried Clara's journal and the angel, drawing strength from their presence. But it was during a return visit to the Jenkins family that Daniel experienced a moment of profound clarity. As he watched Sam, now healthy and helping his father rebuild their barn, he realized the true power of what they had created. It wasn't just about fixing things or teaching skills, it was about restoring hope. And that hope, Daniel knew, was Clara's true legacy. Autumn gave way to winter, and snow once again blanketed the quiet town of Maplewood. The Ripple Workshop now stood as a symbol of resilience and hope, its windows glowing warmly in the frost-bitten evenings. Though Daniel's work had expanded far beyond the town, Maplewood remained his home, a reminder of where it had all begun. One evening, as Daniel swept the workshop floor, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "You've been busy." He turned, startled, to find Clara's brother standing in the doorway, his coat dusted with snow. "I didn't expect to see you," Daniel said, smiling. "What brings you here?" The man held up a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, something Clara left behind. "She wanted you to have it when the time was right." Curious, Daniel took the parcel and opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter and a small key. He looked up, puzzled. "What's this for?" The man gestured toward the letter. "She'll explain." Later that night, Daniel sat by the fire, the carved angel resting beside him, and unfolded Clara's letter. Her handwriting was familiar, yet the words carried a weight that made his chest tighten. Dear Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you've already achieved more than I could have dreamed. I always knew you had the light within you, but seeing how you've used it to ignite others fills me with immeasurable pride. The key belongs to a small cottage in the hills overlooking Maplewood. It was my sanctuary, a place where I found peace and clarity. I'm giving it to you now, not as a retreat, but as a space to dream even bigger. Use it as you see fit, and know that my heart is with you in every step you take. Love always, Clara. Daniel closed the letter, his vision blurred with tears. The key felt cool in his hand, yet it carried a warmth he couldn't describe. The next day, Daniel followed Clara's instructions to the cottage. It was nestled among snow-laden pines, its stone walls sturdy against the chill. Inside, the air was filled with a faint scent of lavender, as though Clara's presence lingered still. The cottage was modest but cozy, a single room with a fireplace, a desk, and a window that offered a breathtaking view of Maplewood below. On the desk was a notebook, its pages blank, waiting for new stories to be written. Daniel stood there for a long time, imagining Clara sitting by the fire, penning her thoughts, dreaming of the ripples she hoped to create. This is where it all began for you, he murmured, his voice barely audible. And now it begins again for me. Over the years, the cottage became more than a retreat. It became a hub for Daniel's growing efforts. Leaders from neighboring workshops gathered there to exchange ideas and plan new initiatives. The Ripple movement, as it came to be known, touched countless lives, spreading far beyond what Clara or Daniel had ever imagined. Back in Maplewood, the angel remained on the mantle of Daniel's family home, its wings glimmering softly in the firelight. Timmy, now older, often gazed at it, recalling the journey it had inspired. One snowy evening, Daniel sat with his family by the fire. Timmy, now carving toys of his own, looked up and asked, "Do you think Clara knew how much this would grow?" Daniel smiled, the locket around his neck glinting in the light. "She knew," he said. "She always knew." As the snow fell gently outside, Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. Clara's legacy was no longer just a memory. It was alive, woven into the fabric of countless lives. And as long as kindness continued to ripple outward, her light would never fade.